Nice Radio Kalaloo presents Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative and yes, certainly controversial socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard only on Nice Radio. First aired on Saturdays at 6 p.m. with repeat broadcasts on Sundays at 9 p.m. You can always catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info, or you can check out our Just Another Look blog, www.justanotherlook.com. I am, of course, Keith Joseph. Today, dear friends, is Saturday. It is the 25th day of January 2020. Welcome to another edition of your favorite program, Just Another Look. During the week now concluding, we were saddened by the news of the passing of former Governor General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Sir Frederick Ballantyne. So Fred served this country as its Governor General for a number of years. And his contribution to the country in the field of medicine and as a human being generally allows for the leaving of a legacy. Some may even perhaps say it's a mixed legacy. But he served until perhaps he felt that it was time to go. And so we say farewell to Sir Frederick Ballantyne, Governor General, former Governor General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is a program, dear friends, on which we have said time and time and time again, it is particularly important for our people to understand that it is absolutely necessary for you to engage your critical thinking skills. We know that one of the challenges of our education system is precisely that. How to get students to apply their critical thinking skills. How to get students to think for themselves. And such a task is rendered all the more difficult, even for some in the teaching service, by the fact that our politicians have over the years, while saying otherwise, preferred for people not to be able to think for themselves. Politicians in this Caribbean of ours and the political culture that has emerged in this Caribbean of ours are such that they believe they thrive best in an environment where people cannot think for themselves or are not allowed to think for themselves. And that is why Just Another Look insists that in a majority of cases within this Caribbean of ours, we have produced benevolent dictators as our political leaders, as our presidents and prime ministers and premiers and so on. Because they have emerged in a culture. The foundations laid by the colonizers, the conquerors and colonizers, that assumes that the masses are like chaff. They blow in and with the wind. And so they say good things about the public when they need your vote. But there is a certain taking for grantedness that is reflective of an apparent fundamental belief that our Caribbean people are better served if they are not allowed to think for themselves. And so when our political leaders recognize that some people are willing to take on the challenge of thinking for themselves and of applying their critical thinking skills in analyzing what is happening around them and what is being done to them by the politicians go after them. So they tell you, as they do in this case in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, how much they love you. How much they love you. But the reality is that the expression of that love is often the absence of any real opportunities for you to contribute to national development unless you are doing it through the political party, or you're willing to pay obeisance to the leadership. It is the reason, dear friends, that every now and again the mouths of our politicians slip and the truth emerges. While seeking to keep up the political charade of letting the masses believe that we love you, every now and again there's a slip of the tongue. So you got this flippant, offhandish remark about people only remembering their last meal. You get the official, the unofficial flippant remark about people being possessive of a breadfruit mentality. You get the flippant remark of people being unschooled and untutored, uncultured, and possessive of a learned helplessness. You get the flippant remark of wash your foot and come. Or that you really and truly hand to mouth. These remarks that emerge from the mouths of politicians are really reflective more of what they think of you. That is the reality. It may not have been by accident. Because when you believe something deeply, there are times when you're trying to present a lie that the truth slips through. By the time you catch yourself, you recognize it's already too late. But it only becomes an issue to those who have taken on the challenge of applying their critical thinking skills to what the politicians are doing around, to, and in the name of the masses. And that's why we ask people, to remember that on the night of elections, of the election victory of the Unity Labour Party in 2001, there was what many thought was a commitment being given to facilitate the genuine unification of the people of this country. That we will change the mantra from Labour now to Together now. That was nearly 19 years ago. And in the 19 years, there has been no evidence of any desire to unify the country. And so, over the last 19 years, it has been so much Labour now, Labour again, Labour ad infinitum. And it is easier, therefore, armed with an apparent belief that the masses are not necessarily applying their critical thinking skills. We can enjoy the fact that more and more people have come to the recognition that the way to go and the way to enjoy a better life in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is to show by a consistent wearing of the color of the party that you are being loyal and you are eager to be loyal. The party has become primordial. For some, the party may have even become something of a religion. So it is not surprising, friends, that we continue to see a kind of politics being practiced in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that remains essentially consistent with those who conquered us, those who colonized us, those who exploited us, and those who continue to do so ad infinitum. It begs the question whether we are also of an understanding that our political leaders often appear more willing to do the bidding of those who would wish to see our people continually under the yoke of a particular class and a particular system, that when you look at it, is really inimical to the best interests of the country. And so, sometimes you hear an argument on the political platform, and you've heard it already. This is what this other side want to do. This is what that other side want to do, etc., etc. In the hope that you can be sufficiently distracted from what they have done and continue to do. Who have been the beneficiaries of this country's present system of governance over the last 19 years? Who have been the beneficiaries? It's easy to tell because they wear red. It's easy to tell because they make themselves and their material possessions available to the party to show loyalty so that they can continue to be the ones getting the fruits of labor. That is why we can have an attempt at a near dynasty, political dynasty. We do not understand how is it reasonable, right-thinking individuals can allow themselves in public to be handed books that are difficult to sell and then have a comment made that you have to have them read, Is it that you know very well that they never read any of the books you publish and that they have no desire to read any of the books they publish, so you have to bring it up in public, give it to them, and then hope that they will see it as a form of admonishment in the public domain? But sometimes you need to try to read it and see if you could understand why it is they're written the way they are. So we have to have an understanding, dear friends, that it is not by accident that Vincentians have been referred to as unschooled and untutored and uncultured, malignant, minority wrongs, possessive of a sort of learned helplessness. If there was an education revolution, as the Unity Labour Party administration would have us believe that they have been establishing, if indeed there was an education revolution, there would have been a vehement rejection of the characterization of Vincentians in those terms. If there was indeed an education revolution. But the kind of political gimmickry that characterizes this Caribbean has people welcoming those comments, applauding those comments. So hand to mouth might appear to have been a slip of the tongue, but you have to ask yourself, was it? Or is that a genuine belief? And therefore, that gives rise to the kind of modus operandi of the politics that is practiced in the country. How could you belong to an institution? Remember that a political party is established to access the reins of governance. People don't form political parties to lose. They form political parties because they believe that as a collective they can lead the country. But you know very well what happens most of the time. An individual has the ambition to become the prime minister. And that individual gathers around him or herself people of like minds, but who are willing to pay obeisance to him. So that from the get-go, our political parties have this characteristic, or whether they say it or not, of maximum leadership. The leader should not be challenged. He's the maximum leader. And over a period of time, like the Goebbels ethos kicks in, and they begin to see themselves almost infallible. That is why in the aftermath of the referendum in November of 2009, we were able to say to you that the very persons who were making invited to do the political commentary on radio and television, they knew very well what side they were on. And you saw it evident. There's really no attempt at allowing it to be an objective coverage. And so when the results started coming in the beginning, they were all jolly. Because they saw it as an endorsement of their party's position and of the party's leadership. When the tide started to turn, later on as the results came in, you saw it on their faces. And then they began to be critical of the same party that they were just gloating about a few minutes before. They were the ones who were making comments about the approach of the party, of the leadership style characteristic of the party. But they dared not attempt to change because they knew of the consequences. That is why at the time when Burns Bonady was brought on, and then there were some little grumblings in the corner, when he was removed from the office, the same prime minister who had appointed him made comments about he will have the last laugh. He meaning Burns Bonady. But one wondered whether it was Burns who was going to have the last laugh or the prime minister. So that while officially he removed Burns in accordance with the grumbling, by the time Burns got the next appointment, he was indeed capable of laughing at those who thought that their grumbles were responsible for his removal from the first appointment. So that is our system. Benevolent dictatorship. It is the reason that lumber, galvanized steel, and cement forms an integral part of the political culture of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Hand to mouth. A perception. Part of the psychological dependency syndrome that Kassim Backus talks about. What a debilitating feature, this legacy of colonialism. That's what it has left us. A debilitating psychological syndrome of dependence. And so politicians like the fact that they can have political rallies with food and drinks flowing like water. And they give you party shirts and they give you this and you're singing and you whatever. Until you swoon yourself into political loyalty. That is our political culture. It's the reason why politicians, however much they may have believed in the communist ethic, the socialist ethos, recognize the important role of religion in the political culture of our region. That you see them wearing religious trinkets. You see them quoting scripture. And you ask yourself, is it that they have transformed much like Saul becoming Paul? Or is it a continuation of the political gimmickry that we have seen at play since the days of conquest? That is our political reality. If you want to accept that you're hand to mouth, you could make that your cup of tea. If you want to accept that you're unschooled, you're untutored, you're uncultured, you're malignant, you're minority wrongs, or you're possessive of a sort of learned helplessness, then that might be your cup of tea. A consistent failure to apply your critical thinking skills. There is no education revolution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Over the last 19 years, there has been no education revolution. Our approach to education remains essentially the same. You remember some years ago, the Prime Minister suddenly apparently woke up one morning and started telling us about quality teaching. And he produced a small document that he circulated to the ministry to have circulated around the place. What was the impact? Or was there intended to be an impact? Or was it part of the showboating that constitutes part of the benevolent dictatorship that exists in our types of political systems? That you hit upon an idea, something comes into your head, and you make it. Let's talk about it for the next 9 days. Because you're so much in control of people's thinking patterns, is that it? Is that you recognize that there is a necessary trade-off where you make them believe that you're giving them something, when in truth and in fact, you may very well be encouraging them to stay where they are. The results of our annual exams speak for themselves, you know. But we are not allowed to discuss our approach to education. We are too busy attempting to play the game of political fealty. We are too busy, anxious to lie prostrate, awaiting the droppings from Papa's table, because that level of sustenance is enough to carry you through. The business of who you are and the development of self as a more rounded individual, which is the ultimate objective of education. That is missed. What we do is we check numbers. And we say we have more people going off to study. We have more people buying cars. We have more people building homes. And we cite those as examples of the growing education revolution. That's not it. The quality of national discourse is a reflection of where we are educationally. The quality of our national discourse. The extent to which, in anything we do, we have that critical eye of saying we can, in fact, analyze this. We can speak to it. And so we can bring out our own truth about what is before us. Peel away the clutter and see through it. But instead, we are hamstrung by those who lead us. Because it is about chest thumping. Only I, under my leadership, could we have had this. That's what we get from our politicians, our political leaders. Egoism. And you recognize that in the political parties, they make that acceptable. So it's not about thinking critically. It is instead about creating a kind of an ethos, a modus operandi that allows those who lead to maintain their leadership more often than not through the cultivation of the politics of fear. What are the real issues impacting Vincennes? Political leadership determines that on their own. They don't have to consult you. And you remember the political furor that took place after the tragedy across the Dry River. When the lives of those children were lost the morning that they were going to school. The sight of two brothers dead in the water but clinging to each other resonated with our politicians for how long? You remember the anxiety of some of our politicians to make sure, get buses, man, get buses, carry people, bring people, to show our support for those who lost loved ones in the rock gutter accident. But 5 years on, they didn't seem to have any political currency. So the political parties left the people to their own devices. You don't seem to have any political currency. And unlike what happened at the funeral, every politician wanted to be. 5 years on, the anniversary is celebrated only by those who felt the pain. Only by those who experienced the pain. That is what our politics tells us. They know when to play the game and when to appear to use you, when they appear to be part of you, when they appear to empathize with you. And then they abandon you. They could not remember that it was the 5th anniversary of that horrific accident where so many youngsters had their lives sniffed out. They couldn't remember that we did not have the requisite equipment and capacity to have created the kind of rescue mission that accident necessitated. They don't want you to remember that. But instead, there were so many people brought to the funeral service. Brought to the funeral service. Do you think it was any genuine support? You could continue thinking that if you want, just like you think there's an education revolution. Because the politicians say so. What has happened to our Vincentian society? Those who dare say like Posa, you must think, I leave me mouth in a me muma. Those who dare to stand up and say, let us apply our critical thinking skills and analyze what is happening around us, are chastised. You should not be thinking for yourself. You know, socialists, those who are of the left orientation, have been the ones to criticize politicians of the right for megalomania. How you want to build fancy buildings. You want to emphasize buildings. When you look at some of those socialist societies, they were engaged in more megalomania than people from the right. If you get my drift. Here, we've been very critical of those who were putting up buildings. You remember when the NDP was in office, and as part of the political campaign, they produced a little booklet on several of the buildings that they had constructed, whether it was schools, community centers, whatever. They were chastised for thinking only of edifices as a feature of development. What is it today? What is it today? What do we have today? Now suddenly we are building hotels. Hotels are oozing out of your ears and head. And our politicians are boasting suddenly they've seen a glimmer of hope. They've seen the light. We are building hotels everywhere. And the same politicians spent 9.5 years constructing an international airport and never once engage any sort of seeming anxiety to facilitate the construction of hotels so we could have had hotel rooms at the time the airport was being opened. We are examples of the art of adhocracy after the fact. But 9.5 years, what did we have? Just Bokament. And perhaps the politicians may have smelled the rat Because there was never any hard opening. There was only a soft opening. And even the party members were afraid to be critical of the fact that we were once told at the time of the soft opening that that facility at Bocamet Bay would have been ready to host guests. The thousands of guests we were expecting for the Gold Cook matches that we had in 2007. It was never ready. It was never going to be ready for that. But it sounded good on the political platforms to say that. That is why people were shocked when Jomo Thomas entered the political arena as a candidate and ended up saying some things on the platform that people just couldn't believe. When he was talking about the development that will take place, the likes of which you have never seen. And people says, Jomo? Jomo? You sure you know what you say, what you have become? But he has learned the importance of applying his critical thinking skills. And that may well be what has led him to his decision relative to the post that he was holding for some time. We have to understand the politics of our country. We spent 9.5, almost 10 years building an international airport and did not remember that we needed hotel rooms. So while our Minister of Tourism was boasting, if we build it, they will come, we were able to say, if we build it, they will come. But where will they stay? So now we're in a rush. You hear everybody's deadline now? Before the end of this year. Why? Because this is election year. So everything has to be built before the end of this year. So that the electorate can see buildings all over the place. And then say, we developed. You notice we developed. Nobody is asking, what has caused the stalling of work on the hotels on the leeward side? Why aren't we having a discussion on that? Why aren't we talking about the plights of the workers who were given that impression? It's the same way. Everything must happen before the end of this year. So we've rushed the legislation on medical marijuana. We have learned nothing from history. What we are doing now with medical marijuana, in the way we are rushing into it, we saw that at the time of conquest, when tobacco was it. We saw that when we went into sugarcane cultivation during slavery. We saw that when we went to cocoa. We saw that when we went into bananas. We saw that when we returned to cocoa. And the Valetaro story of dreams and dreams. And now we are seeing it with medical marijuana. Once more, dear friends, once more, Just Another Look says, without any fear of contradiction, that we are going down the same road with medical marijuana. Suddenly, all of the bright lights of the Caribbean, have rushed to enact legislation, just like we did stupidly with the sunset legislation for Cricket World Cup. Get in there. Get a few companies to come in. Blah, 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 blah. The small man will get nothing. The small man will get nothing. It will remain essentially the small man. And then they will tell you about access to small business loans, access for small enterprises to get this and to get that. The small man will get nothing. He will remain small and he will remain close to poverty's door. Politicians in the Caribbean political culture with which we are familiar thrive off of people with lower levels of academic achievement. Because there is a fundamental belief that they are the ones most in need. They are the ones who are quote unquote hand to mouth. And consequently are most likely to be duped into accepting all that is fed from the political platforms. That is why we can have those words slipping out. That is why we can use those terms. Because it's the political praxis. It is the norm in our politics. You feed them. You give them drink. And then because you know of their religious faith, you then quote scripture better than any pastor. Because you believe that that is more convincing. Understand their people. Goebbels was right. If you tell a lie often enough, everybody listening to you, because you're growing in confidence each time you say it, will begin to think it's true. But a psychological weakness in all of it is the fact that you will eventually believe it's true and be unable to distinguish between that and the real truth, because you have created a truth of your own that you are using to curry favor with the electorate. You know, in a previous edition of Just Another Look, first aired on Saturday, 11 January 2020. Just Another Look addressed the fact that we are already into an election season.